Single pane of glass. The thing is, like, yeah, that sounds glorious, right? You've got this, everything's there, but how are you using it?
Model Context Protocol is the standard that enables AI to AI communications. It's also a way for you to bring in data from multiple sources as well as different tools.
Because he was like, oh yeah, our platform's great. If someone wants to come in, this is all they have to do is download this app and then do all this stuff. And it's like, okay, so you're starting day one fragmented because you're having to download all of these different experiences.
Tech is not set it and forget it. If you're sitting with a vendor that's pretending they know everything,
Run.
We're going to focus on building a unified platform for efficiency and looking at ancillary revenue opportunities. Let's go ahead and do introductions.
My name is Taylor Wiederkehr. I'm the founder and CEO of PropTech IQ. I used to lead innovation for Alliance Residential Company, and then I went on to BH Management, did the same thing. During that tenure on the owner-operator side, I deployed literally 100,000 plus units of IoT, smart home, and ran some of the largest pilots of value quantification that had ever been run in the industry. So ultimately, that was the basis of why PropTech IQ was founded, because just like yourselves, I had a lot of headaches, and I attended this show in your seat. So definitely happy to be here and be on another panel.
My name's Mark Schmulen. I am co-founder and CEO of PropMatic. We optimize your listings for discovery and conversion, whether your next resident starts their search in Google or in their favorite AI app like ChatGPT. Before that, I was the co-founder and CEO of Chirp Systems, a smart access control solution that we ultimately joined with RealPage and the Stratus team to form RealPage Smart Building. I was at RealPage until last July, where I served as general manager and industry principal for Smart Building.
I'm Cris Kimbrough. I'm president of SKBM Smart Technology. We are a PropTech concierge, a one-stop shop for PropTech and multifamily. We create integrated solutions. We talk real estate to real estate people. I've always been on the real estate side. I worked for CBRE and Graystars, and my first time on the dark side. We talk real estate to real estate folks, figure out what you're trying to solve for, what your budgets are, what your business goals are, and then we design a technology solution, implement it, and I can beat you, Taylor, because we have done over 600,000 units.
That's fair. That is very, I know, right? Shots fired, right?
Yeah, I know.
As you're looking at potentially deploying new technology within your ecosystem, within your properties, within a particular location, how do you evaluate that? How do you streamline that? So Taylor, I'll pitch the first question to you. How can operators evaluate and streamline technology ecosystems?
You really need to understand what you are trying to streamline, not just say, hey, it's like you hear the buzzword of AI right now, and it's no one really can tell you what the foundational function of it actually is. They just know the buzzword. And so when we're talking about specifically streamlining something, you have a lot of different components across your business that have potential to be streamlined. But if you don't understand your foundation and your goals, then of course, you could be like walking around in a dark room without a flashlight. Really, of course, you want to establish those goals, and typically a great place to start is your PMS system. Many of you have chosen your horse, either it be, the Real Pages of the world, Yardi, Entrata, even Appfolio, great platform. But essentially, if you don't have kind of a centralized core of information where everything lives. Again, it doesn't matter if your access control talks to your smart building IoT if neither one of those communicates with the main system that your leasing staff and everybody else is working within. At the same time as well, you definitely want to see what have you deployed. So in many of your portfolios today, of course, you acquire, you sell, and we've actually talked about this a little bit, where you acquire the headaches from somebody else's decision. And so you end up having already deployed technology that you might not have even chosen. So understanding what's in the building, understand what you're working with, and kind of working once again from your foundation. Does this work, yes or no? And if it doesn't, then of course, make a little check mark. All right, this is one of the systems we need to find a potential solution to if you don't already have one lined up. But curious to hear Mark, because of course, I know you back on the RealPage days, y'all tried to centralize and consolidate your own stack, but how do you feel about this approach?
I mean, I think in a perfect world, if we're all starting from scratch, you would design what is the optimal workflow and then bring in the technology to support that. Absolutely. But we don't always have that luxury, especially, working at companies with a legacy technology stack. And with all these new capabilities, whether it's around automation, machine learning, or agentic AI, you really do need to contemplate fundamentally, what are those goals? What are those processes going to look like? And then how can I bring in technology on top of what I already have? The whole world's trying to figure this out together. What we're seeing in terms of the innovation coming out of the LLM companies are solutions that are adaptable, that can actually bolt onto your existing systems to build agentic workflows. Let's look at it like in this perspective. And my whole world now is around like leasing, right? So I'm going to put us in the minds of a consumer, right? And say you're doing an apartment search. In the old days, you would go to Google and you'd be like, hey, I'm looking for this. And Google would be, oh, here's a bunch of websites that you can go click into, go find the answer yourself. What most of us think of AI when we use ChatGPT or Copilot is generative AI, where it just like gives you the summary.
That's right.
What agentic AI is now, your AI can act, right? I can search, I can evaluate. I recommend that you book a tour at this Ancillary property. I can sync with your calendar. I see you're available next Friday. Would you like me to go ahead and book that tour for you? Like that exists today. That's what agentic AI is in a applying to at least an apartment search.
Before you know what tech you're starting with, you need to know what your business goals are, period. What your business goals are. What are you trying to accomplish? And so agentic AI is a shiny thing. And you know that you need to have it because everybody tells you need to have it. But like you really have to go back to those foundational questions first. And when you start talking to technology providers, have those goals in mind and be able to communicate them clearly, because what's going to happen is you're going to start looking for tech without knowing what you need.
And I'd say agentic is such a buzzword, and it's misappropriated, and it's also misapplied. And not every single one of your workflows or business functions needs agentic, because that really is where the AI is somewhat autonomous and you're trusting it to be able to work without you, just with supervision. And it can make mistakes. We're still in the first or second inning of this huge paradigm shift.
You know, there's always this desire to try to have everything into a single consistent system. But as you grow, whether it's you've got to go by acquisition and now you've got inherited some technical debt, it gets difficult to try to have it all on a single system. And I know with the software company I work with, as we're dealing with some of the largest companies in certain industries, like the data is across multiple systems.
Oh yeah.
They're doing their best to where possible, where it has to live in a certain system, but then making sure that they can get that data to communicate across the different platforms that they have. And so that's kind of a good lead up to talking about how do you look at seamless data flow? How do you look at integrations? How can data flow freely and securely between systems without having to do like manual exports and copying it into Excel and using Google Sheets or whatever it might be?
For real. And who has time for that anymore? I just want to get on ChatGPT and be like, this is what I'm trying to do. Please do it for me. Thank you. I'm going to drink my coffee. You can see there's really a couple of kind of foundational layers. And I love that Mark is about to get into like how to take the foundational layer and really modernize it for things like, you know, AI, of course. At a core baseline, of course, standardized APIs, we're all familiar with that buzzword, but if you're unfamiliar with the technical term of API, it is essentially the standard communication protocol layer. And ultimately, if you have, let's say, your maintenance system not within your PMS, ultimately it's generating data, right? That data, of course, can flow out of the system and into other systems to make it proactive. So ultimately, understanding that you have standardized APIs across your ecosystem and that you're leveraging those is effective. But in many scenarios, and this actually comes into a lot of the IoT, access control, and other platforms, is there isn't really an API standardization that's going to allow you to accomplish your goals. And so we're actually seeing a lot of different platforms pop up. And a couple were actually vendors here at the show where they're secure middleware platforms. So ultimately, while they may not leverage standardized APIs, they've developed some sort of communication protocol between more proprietary-esque systems, and ultimately they provide that layer of middleware in between systems for secure communication. Outside of that, of course, you definitely want to make sure security is in mind, because once you start sending and receiving data between systems, you're creating opportunities, very big problems if you're not thinking ahead. So that's where you want to make sure you're leveraging data encryption on both sides if you can. From sender and receiver. The most basic things you can do outside of that, of course, is also role-based access controls. So even if it's not encrypted, but you have a role-based access system that essentially, you know, limits people's access to that data just based on what their user profile is, that's, you know, in many cases acceptable too, because we understand Not every company has the personnel dedicated to security protocols and encryption, and that can get very expensive very quick. If you're pushing and pulling data, having that core base layer communicate at a similar interval, it's also very important. So if you don't want your PMS sending data every second of every day, especially with some of the fees right now in the cloud, with it being bandwidth driven, if you have something sending data every 2 to 3 seconds, you're going to get a gigantic bill from your cloud provider. But if everybody from an ecosystem perspective agrees, hey, we'll take a data push every 60 minutes, or we'll take a data push every 30 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever, as long as everybody's on that same cadence, it can keep your centralized core system on track and up to date.
In a perfect world, we would have one vendor and we can all live in their beautiful walled garden and have one neck to choke. And there's some players out there who want to pretend to be that, and they're not. And they'll try, but it's like a sofa bed. It's neither a great sofa nor is it a great bed, but it's all encompassed in one.
Well said.
And I think we want to work with the best, and that oftentimes means different vendors, but you need your systems to be able to speak to each other so that you can have continuity and efficiencies within your workflows.
Listen, I don't know everything, right, about technology. I work for a technology company. I design technology solutions. I've been in tech for a long time now. It's like, Taylor, you can talk about APIs, and we all know that an API-driven integration is not always the best integration. Maybe it's not even an integration at all, really. Surrounding yourself with, being smart enough to ask questions and ask a lot of questions, I think is the key to success, because being curious and getting out there and really, again, you've got to understand what workflows you're trying to automate, what your goals you're trying to accomplish. Do you need integrations? Yes, it would be great if there was one app to rule them all. That's not going to happen.
Ooh.
I will say I don't know all day long. I will say I don't know. I will find that out for you. If you're sitting with a vendor that's pretending they know everything,
Run.
go away. You're done. You're done. No, and if they're trying to sell you one size fits all, if it sounds too good, it is too good. And we talk about like secure automation. What scares the life out of me, what keeps me up at night, is we've deployed all these edge devices and they aren't secure. We haven't had it happen yet in multifamily. It's happened a lot in commercial real estate. People hijack elevators and shut down high-rise buildings for a week. It happens because they're automated elevators. And so we haven't had it happen in multifamily yet, but that's what, when we're talking about like data security, I worry about all those edge devices.
So coming back to APIs, obviously, if you have solutions that have APIs, they can be talking to each other, or one can be passing information into another. As you're adopting new technology, that has APIs, is it better to, at the beginning, kind of have two different screens and then decide later, okay, now we understand which data is important to us and we're going to start pulling that in through APIs? Or do all that API stuff up front?
Single pane of glass. The thing is, like, yeah, that sounds glorious, right? You've got this, everything's there, but how are you using it? Like, who's going to use that single pane of glass? That's what I always go back to, is who's going to use it? Like, do you have somebody in your organization that's going to sit there and stare at the screen full of like innumerable pieces of data and be able to use it? People have tried to sell me single pane of glass for a minimum of 10 years now, and I'm sorry, like it's like
I agree with you.
It's like one of those things. I'm like, no, you need actionable insights from your data. That's what you need. You need role-based data consumption. We were talking last night that I would never want to be a property manager. I think that's an incredibly hard job, especially in multifamily. And what do they need? What do they need from your data? What do they need to see in the morning?
Talking about using data and then automating and creating automations to take things off their plate are two very different things. So I think like leveraging an API for, let's say, an IoT-based system that has access control and role-based, settings, where if a resident moves in after the leasing agent moves them into the PMS, that it automatically creates that profile for, let's say, the smart building and access control and all the things. So that's something now they don't have to do. I think that usage of APIs from a foundational level on day one makes perfect sense. And I think actually, if you're spending the time to invest and deploy, those are absolutely the things you want to be choosing to implement day one, because that's part of the efficiencies gained from using those technologies. You don't want to create more things to do. But when it comes to centralizing the data that is coming from those types of systems, and ultimately then saying, okay, we've got the system in place, we're leveraging all the automations. Now, how are those automations driving, let's say, value with number of work orders? Has that increased or decreased? Has this or this or this happened, right? Those are things I think you learn over time as you're really integrating those different systems into your business, and then ultimately trying to determine what becomes important to what stakeholders. But it is no single pane of glass to do any of that.
Well, and I think you just made a really important point, which is tech is not set it and forget it, right? It doesn't solve all your problems. It's not like you're going to spend, I don't know, $500,000 on technology and suddenly your business is going to work better tomorrow.
What is the business case?
What's the business?
How are we going to define success 6 months from now when it comes to looking at our P&L?
Yeah. And so then you can say, okay, well, here's a workflow that does need to be automated, right? This is going to make our property staff's lives better. It's going to make our tenants' lives better, but you need to be realistic.
Talking about the data and multiple systems, I'm going to pitch a question to Mark. Get back on script now. How can data flow freely and securely between systems without that manual intervention?
I absolutely agree that you need to know what success looks like. You need to have the KPIs. Dashboards are great so you can measure your success or find out what levers you need to pull to fix things when they break. But I think it's a very exciting time now because we can all have our own personal Jarvis, right? We can all be Iron Man.
It's right here.
And what I mean, and it ties into this because like all of our companies should have a new knowledge base, not one that is like FAQ based, or you have to go it puts up a document that you have to go read through. We can all have our own chat GPT. The way that you enable this is through a standard called Model Context Protocol. I think it's a term that you're going to start to hear more about. I don't think you need to be able to define it. Just know that this is ultimately what enables you to build out your own personal chat GPT, if you will, for your company. Because Model Context Protocol is the standard that enables AI to AI communications. It's also a way for you to bring in data from multiple sources as well as different tools. It's wrong to call it the API for AIs. It's more like a docking station where the AI communicates through this docking station that connects to multiple databases and different tools. It may be your pricing and availability data. It may be your CMS that has images and documents about your pet policies or images of the pool and the units and the floor plans. But if you were to build like a leasing concierge on your website, which is something that we do, we come in and stand up a Model Context MCP infrastructure for you to connect all of your data sources, but also other tools so that the LLM or the agent can actually answer questions effectively and pull data from multiple sources. It can pull up pricing and availability, and then it can show you pictures of the units. And if you ask a question about the neighborhood, it can tell you what are the great restaurants in the area. But it's able to do that because you are connecting multiple databases and tool sets, enabling the LLM to actually be agentic, to take action, to answer questions.
I consider myself an evangelist of AI, and there are definitely critics of AI out there. And one of the things I commonly hear about AI, particularly large language models, is that the output that it gives is just looking for what is a pattern that looks recognizable. And that is partially true to how LLMs work, but when they can actually connect to real data, they can pull real data. They're not just making stuff up. And so I think this is where a lot of people say, oh, well, the LLMs just make stuff up. It's not even true. That was a problem a while ago. They're getting better and better to be able to search what is true data that's out there. The problem is that when it's searching for true data out on the internet, there's a lot of different versions of truth out on the internet. But if you got it connected for this particular domain and saying this is our pricing, this is our availability, it's not going to stray from that. It's going to pull from that, and it's going to use the power of LLM to know what it's looking for based on the question that was asked.
Actually, it's really interesting because OpenAI is now making a strong push. They're going to all like the big brands, and they'll come down to every company eventually. They want you to directly feed your data into them and your APIs, your public data, like not your private data, but the information that it needs to better answer questions, because they know that you're the best source of information on your own solution. They don't want there to be hallucinations or to pull data from some, nut job. Yeah, exactly. We talk about agentic AI, but agentic workflows is something entirely different. I may or may not be getting into this later. but let me just say it now. And we'll use the context of like a leasing funnel because that's the world I live in. But if you have an agent on your website and a prospect can come and get a bunch of answers and they're like, this is a really cool place. Like I want to book a tour, right? Well, then that booking needs to be integrated with a whole nother system, which is your CRM, whether it's Knock or Funnel or Elise AI, which themselves are automated workflows that are becoming more and more agentic and AI based so that they can then take that lead handoff and they can nurture them and get them ultimately to submit a lease, go through they may then pass it off to Vero or another verification solution, or they have their own internal. AI becomes agentic when one agent can pass information to another agent to take an action. Maybe it passes it to another agent, ultimately to have a successful business outcome.
We were talking about like working directly with brands, feeding that data directly in. Like I think what I was at a kind of a think tanky kind of conference earlier this year, and we were talking about AI. And the thing that came up is that like all the data going into this AI is already polluted by AI. So when you start building an agentic system, you do have to use your data.
Your data.
You have to use your data and not rely on what's out there, because all of that data has already been through multiple AI systems. And it's just, like I said, I love ChatGPT, I love Gemini, but like you can put in something, and like I did it 2 weeks ago. It was like glaring. Like I put in what I wanted and it spit out a slide for me, and that was just all word salad, like misspelled words. And I'm like, oh, this isn't helping me. But it's because it's feeding off of what is essentially dirty data.
Garbage in, garbage out. So going back to the foundation, particularly looking at the network infrastructure, Cris, what role does network infrastructure play enabling remote ops, IoT, smart systems, all of these things that we're talking about?
Well, I love that you said network infrastructure and not Wi-Fi. Thank you. I have been preaching this for many years now. If anybody's ever seen me speak before, they've heard me say this. Like that's you have to have that. And I call it digital infrastructure, but I mean, I talk about this all the time. Like I know a lot of us in multifamily immediately go to Wi-Fi. We think like managed Wi-Fi, we're going to make money off of it. But I think we need to change that conversation in multifamily and really start talking about network infrastructure and digital infrastructure and having that foundation to enable all this other technology.
That being said, managed Wi-Fi is the #1 requested amenity.
Oh, yeah.
So like
Yeah.
if it can serve as the backbone for your smart building and enable automation and what you need to centralize operations, and because it really is the foundation for that.
Yeah.
It also happens to be the #1 amenity people want. So it has dual purpose.
So it's got multiple stakeholders. You have to make sure you find a solution that's good for what your residents need, but you've also got to think about what we need to support all of the IoT that we have today, and looking forward as to what are the IoT devices we're going to have in the future. Because, if you're looking at how things are scaling, I'm an early adopter of tech, and I've always getting more stuff. Like if I look at how many network devices are in my home right now, it's over 150. My network infrastructure at home doesn't like having 150 devices on that network.
Well, that's because you have 8 kids.
This is true. This is true. Taylor, your thoughts about network infrastructure?
Oh Lordy, it still kind of actually makes me laugh that we're calling it an amenity, where it's like this is clearly a utility at this point. Connectivity is a principle to live and do
It's a fundamental human right.
That's right. That is right. But it really is. I mean, if you want to leverage remote operations, if you want to deploy smart technology, if you want to, start to look at like the real problem in our industry, which is, of course, people shortage. If you want to start distributing your staff across multiple assets, things like that, you can't do any of those things unless you have solid, stable connectivity. One of our clients, they haven't got to that point yet, but they've focused so much on the business ops side, on the leasing staff, on making sure that their team is connected and there's absolutely no issues with an incredibly high uptime, which is not an easy thing to do. I will tell you very much. They have a foundation in place that now can be scaled. And so as we start to explore things like managed Wi-Fi and come really with a strategy to how do we start to extend this connectivity, we're not starting from scratch. And so I think having that at a core principle, even at a base layer for the office and then expanding out, that's a great place to start if you can't invest wholly in everything across the community.
And you two have been in this business a long time. How many times have you been asked for future proof?
I hate that word.
I don't use it. I use future flexible, future resilient, future enabled. None of those, no future anything is there without that network infrastructure first.
Exactly.
Like that's the closest, I always say the closest you can get to future proof is fiber. That's my opinion, is fiber is we're going to have fiber for a very long time.
If you want your teenagers to send you a text, turn off the internet, and all of a sudden they'll acknowledge that you're a parent and you can actually control something. Resident-facing platforms and experience integration. Go back to Taylor. How are properties using resident-facing apps and portals to be able to kind of streamline communication, service, amenity use on top of this foundational, platform that we have at these locations?
We've all heard the word enough, which is app fatigue. I mean, it's real, obviously. It creates a lot of frustration. And I can tell you again, just as being a millennial myself and having lived in an apartment for a very long time, there's nothing worse than moving in and finding out like, okay, I got to download the RealPage app to pay my rent. I got to download the Brevo app to get access to this. I've got to download the Gatewise app to get access to this. I mean, it just becomes like now you're creating a folder on your phone called apartment. You've got 15 freaking apps in there. Oh, you want to sign up for Wi-Fi, or you want to get access to your managed Wi-Fi? Well, that's another app. Hey, download our app. Hey, download our app. Like, I mean, I saw it yesterday in a lot of demos from some of these vendors where like they talk about it like it's something so simple. These guys don't understand that app fatigue is one of the biggest problems, because he was like, oh yeah, our platform's great. If someone wants to come in, this is all they have to do is download this app and then do all this stuff. And it's like, okay, so you're starting day one fragmented because you're having to download all of these different experiences. So I think there has been a push. I mean, there's still not a single, I would say, solitary app that I would suggest. So that's where I'm not going to do any name drops. But there are definitely a lot of companies out there that are trying. They're trying very hard to solve this difficult problem, which is how do I bring in rent payments, maintenance tickets, chat with the front office staff, give them full access of how do they control their smart building. And I think actually companies like RealPage, and especially how they acquired Chirp, prime example, where RealPage is like, hey, look, we see our customers are struggling with this. Why don't we centralize? But the challenge with that is that what they're trying to do is put their customers into a walled garden. And I think that that is in itself a problem. So very much having that interoperability, talking about standardization of protocols, middleware, things like that. We'll talk about more of that, Chris, for sure.
How many of your residents have to use multiple apps for their experience in your properties?
Do you even have apps? I'm curious. How many?
First,
I was going to say,
question.
Yeah, right now the average is between 3 to 5 apps. When it comes to, there's 13 to 15 different technologies on average deployed within a community. And it's a 3 to 5 app interface on average. So it is definitely a problem, but it's, over time.
I say this a lot. I think that a lot of the technology is out there right now, and pardon me to all the vendors and any vendors in the room, but I think is a solution looking for a problem. So I think, if you're talking about those 3 to 5 apps, do you even need them in the first place, right? Are you really making anybody's life better? Are you streamlining anything? Are you making it easier? So like, I think it's really easy to get distracted by, you come to shows like this, you talk to a lot of technology providers, it all sounds great, but like there are single app solutions out there that are probably going to solve, like maybe you solve for 80%, you don't solve for 100%, but you can get down closer to that by really thinking about what you're trying to solve for.
So I'm curious, and this is really an SKBM, I guess, question.
Uh-oh.
As Presidente, I would love to hear this. So if I'm an owner operator and I'm curious in, let's say, deploying, 3 different types of technologies, and you guys as a one-stop shop, of course, work as an agnostic party between all of them, are you recommending solutions that are like pre-vetted to be foundationally integrated so that way
Yes.
you're bringing them to the table?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's always our goal is we want that seamless experience. RealPage, you called it sidewalk to sofa. I think you copyrighted that.
Curb to couch or sidewalk to sofa.
Yeah.
Yep. Both trademarked.
But also, but we're very careful about when we're evaluating technologies, and I do a lot of that evaluation personally, and that's why, it's one of the reasons I'm here. I go and I talk to, the providers that are out there, but you have to be very careful. Again, don't get distracted. It's just too easy.
And understand your business goals. I mean, because
Exactly.
if Taylor were to ask you that in seriousness, hey, there's 3 things I want to do, your question to him would be why?
Well, and your business goal can't be another $15 on the, in a tech amenity fee.
Well, that was always BS. You weren't going to put a bunch of IoT smart thermostat in a 400 square foot apartment and be able to charge $15 more. Because at the end of the day, rent's based off of supply and demand. And, so
Well, but I think, I mean, and I think this is one of my problems with, I've got a lot of problems with technology and I work in the space, but like, it's like, I don't think we use the data well. I think that's still a huge problem today. The $15 tech amenity fee, I'm like, okay, so yes, in the beginning when they started pitching smart home, right? That you needed, you talk to an asset manager, they're like, what's the ROI, right? They're gonna, what's the ROI? Show me the ROI. So we created these ways to pay for that technology. And then essentially it was that was created, okay, there's going to be a $35 tech amenity fee and it's going to cover the smart home, and
how did that work out?
not well. But now we've got the data. We've got years of data, and Taylor knows this. Taylor does this. This is what his company does. Like, they're making use of that data to show you what your ROI is that's beyond that $35 tech amenity fee.
Mhm.
Well, that's where I think what's really exciting is the affordable space right now. They've been at the back of the pack because, of course, they can't increase rent, right? They can't because they're subsidized. So very much understanding that now that there is actionable data, and we see that, okay, and we'll publish some data here soon with NMHC RETC, but ultimately it shows very clearly that residents are going to communities that have the right amenities that align with their goals, needs, and the living experience that is expected. We're very much, if they're not leveraging those technologies, when you look at how's the market performance at a similar asset in that market versus who has technology versus who doesn't, retention is noticeably higher. Conversion is significantly faster. All is said and done at the end of the day, there's an underwritten budget, of course, for revenue projections, and we all want to manage our revenue, make sure we're not overspending, but very much understanding that by leveraging these technologies, and these techs will pay for themselves through ultimately better performance, is a really big deal right now.
Well, I have a slightly different take, because you had a slide that said unification equals happy residents.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think that does matter, but at some point, every building's going to have smart access. They're going to have community Wi-Fi. It almost becomes table stakes. It almost becomes an expectation now that you're going to have these things. So it's no longer a differentiator. Where the value is, and let me just say, when we developed Chirp, we were so damn lucky to be partnered with Camden Property Trust, because they were able to tell us like the problems that they wanted to solve. And was making residents happy part of it? It was part of it, but that wasn't going to justify the capital expenditure, let alone investing in a startup to try to bring it to life. But it was really about like, how do I lower operational costs? How do I lower my acquisition costs? How can I increase my revenue? And this was a world where SmartRent was around, and Latch was around, and Stratus was around, and Camden was like, none of these guys are doing what I want. In part because the technology they were using required mesh. And we don't need to get too much into it, but it's like, well, you can't just have access control. You also need a thermostat. That's since changed. But Cam's like, we just want access control, because access control is the foundation to enable you to do all these other things. So if you look at this flywheel, just kind of think about it, right? Like on lowering acquisition costs. If you have sidewalk to sofa, access control, then you can enable self-guided tours. And that's what we know is at least 50% of prospects want a self-guided tour where they don't like to talk to humans. And you get a bunch of great data, but it's really where you have lowering your operational costs, because what you're enabling is resident self-service. It was crazy, y'all. When we were starting this project, I would go spend time at all Camden's properties and sit in their leasing office, and their leasing staff, they were spending half their time following up on leads, half their time taking IDs and handing out keys to maintenance workers, to guests, to guys coming to do extermination. I was like, they're doorkeepers. They're not leasing agents. And with automation through or self-service through access control, giving the resident the ability to get into the building themselves or scan their own guest in, or if you have a maintenance person coming, giving them access for that one day that they need to be on site. Once they had sidewalk to sofa access control across their whole portfolio, they actually centralized. They stopped hiring new leasing people and new maintenance technicians as they were leaving. They didn't like fire people, but instead of having 7 people in the maintenance office and 5 people in the leasing office in a stabilized building, they reduced it down to 1 each. And because their communities are somewhat concentrated across MSAs, they were able to have these roving teams, like a hub and spoke model, where they would go to communities as needed, but they centralize all their operations. And boy, did that have a huge impact on their NOI at the end of the day. So their goal was centralization, less staff on site, being more flexible. And the way to do that is through this app where residents can let themselves in and you can send, temporary passes.
It's like everybody's like, oh, AI is, none of us are going to have a job. It's all going to be AI. But that's not true, right? I mean, the whole thing is that AI is supposed to make your job easier, right? And so that it frees you up and it frees your leasing staff up, like you said, to be able to do what they're good at
Yeah.
or
be
what
people.
they should be good at, right?
Absolutely.
And so, and I think also when you think about, there is a lot of churn. I think the national average is like what, 40 to 50% a year or something like that. But like the other thing is like part of that churn is like the career path is not fantastic, right? And so if you're using agentic AI and you're using this technology, you're using access controls and you're using smart locks and it's making it so your staff is better at their jobs. That allows you then to create these career paths so people can, they stick around longer. I was on a call last year and somebody from an owner operator said, what I'm looking for is high tech meets high touch. That's a really hard thing to come up with, right? It's like, I think about, using the data and actionable insights and like, okay, the maintenance visit in unit 101 didn't go well yesterday. Like, how do I get that information to the right person on the staff so that they can reach out and send them a $10 Starbucks gift card?
That's where the automation, the self-service through the resident app, even starting to bring in AI capabilities, that's where the value comes in. It's not about replacing people. It's about freeing them to focus on the things that truly matter and that require that human touch.
Yep.
So here's a quote. This surfaced about a year ago. If you'll remember, here in the U.S., we had the dock workers strike, and one of their negotiating points was, they didn't want automation, right, on the docks. There was a quote from the Swedish Minister for Employment and Integration. I think this philosophy is one that I think companies need to really internalize. He said, in Sweden, if you ask a union leader, are you afraid of new technology? They'll answer, no, I'm afraid of old technology. The jobs disappear, and then we train people for new jobs.
Right.
We won't protect jobs, but we will protect workers.
You know what, though? What we call that upskilling, right? It almost feels like a warm blanket to justify the disruption that's happening from all this automation, because the reality is there will be many new jobs created as a result of all this automation and AI stuff. But there's going to be a lot of people left behind, I think. And the CEO of Anthropic came out and projected over the next 10 years, we're going to see GDP growth like 10% and higher, and we're going to see unemployment rates 20% or higher. And what he was saying is like many of the jobs that are going to go away are the entry-level jobs for the young college grads. And I was having a conversation with a friend and we kind of said, well, he's right, but he's wrong.
Yeah.
Because I think the college kids are going to come out. They're being trained in how to use AI.
Yes, absolutely.
Like every single class talks about AI. I worry about the maybe the more tenured employees
The other end of the
who also who cost more,
Yep.
who are less adept to be upskilled.
If you're not on the front end, if you're making the decision up here and it's going to impact these people on site or it's going to impact your tenants and you're not managing that change, you're not actively getting the cheerleaders, getting those people on board with why you're deploying the technology, how it's going to make it better for them, it's going to fail. And so when you think about like it just seems, oh, we're going to put in access controls. Yeah, well, how, that's a disruption. That's a change. Like you've got to be able to explain why you're doing it to the people that are going to use it.
And at the end of the day, a company is a collection of people, systems, and processes, right? That all work in tandem for a business outcome. And you got to take care of all three of them, right? And when you come in and you change systems, you're disrupting process, you're disrupting people, and vice versa. You bring in a new person, it can disrupt the process and they got to get upskilled on it. So like you got to mind all three of those things and have sensitivity towards it. And like when we were talking about Camden, they didn't fire people. Just there was so much natural attrition that they're like, well, do we really actually need to rehire for that role?
Absolutely.
And I think that's what we're going to see.
My job as a previous innovation leader at an owner operator, I mean, that is a job that's primarily an analyst based job, and a lot of my time, and you held that role too, and your time was spent meeting with vendors, compiling data, presenting that data to decision makers in an effective manner, getting that champion, the buy-in across the organization. Some of these things can be automated because, of course, as you've said many times, agentic AI, it has the potential to cause a force multiplication, but it hasn't removed necessarily the component of how do you get personnel buy-in? How do you actually get those champions across the org to make it successful? And I think that really, if I spent less time in my office analyzing data and more time speaking to the property managers and the decision makers across the organization, the technology implementations would have been even more effective than if, the majority of my job, I would say 40 to 60% of my time was spent compiling information just to present. I would meet a couple times a week with decision makers. So if I'm spending all my time doing that, you think about maintenance staff, they do the same thing in their own right. Leasing staff do the same thing in their own right. As soon as we remove the human element, we failed. This is part of the data that we produced, of course, in tandem with RETSI and MHC, where we actually looked in a very specific market at like assets. And in this case, they did deploy IoT smart locks, smart thermostats with predictive maintenance capabilities. This was all leveraging implementation and market data, but essentially we see here ticket close time. If we look at the market baseline, of course, compared to the normal, takes a lot less time to close tickets, et cetera. And especially we look at the tickets completed per technician on a daily basis. When they start leveraging things like automation, as Mark said, now they get to spend more time doing what they're good at, like actually the tickets themselves, instead of running to the leasing staff and saying, hey, I need a key to go to this unit. No, I've got the access control. It's already given me access. I know where I'm going. But against the market, very much without it, you can see that there's pretty much a pretty congruent baseline there in the middle when compared against the community that has leveraged the technology.
Especially here in Texas, where we have these giant wraps, communities that span multiple blocks, and maintenance guys are driving around in golf carts, and every time they had a work order, they had to like drive to the other side of the property to pull a key through a key track system, and just giving them the ability to immediately pull up a key, have a handy track on your phone to get into, they were able to do 2.5 times the work orders on a daily basis.
Okay, as we wrap up, the one piece of advice you have for them as they're looking at a new technology.
Start with the basics before you get to the advanced stuff. If you don't have a foundation, then AI and automation is going to do absolutely nothing for you.
Understand your business goals. What's the definition for success? What are the business outcomes you're trying to achieve? Technology for the sake of technology, so what? And I'll just add one more thing. I see this all the time. A great new shiny technology comes into your organization, but you don't have change management to actually wrap your operations around this new technology's capabilities. So if you're purchasing technology on behalf of your organization, make sure it also comes with the training and the onboarding and the change in processes that the technology can enable.
There, Cris.
They stole my answers, but I will say digital infrastructure first. Like, you know your business goals, be prepared for change management, all of that. But first thing is put the money into the digital infrastructure.
Absolutely.